Dawkins claim that theology is no subject at all. I already explained that that doesn't make any sense because theology studies lots of things. Even if God does not exist, theology is a subject. It studies the concept of God, and it studies how it relates to the very aspects of philosophy and philosophy of time, God and time. It discusses what the Bible teaches, etc. Uh, Dawkins makes then a remark. He goes back and says, "No, no, wait a minute. Theology studies some things. I just want to show you that." Before I answered again to Lawrence Krauss's claim that theology doesn't have any to answer to his challenge about offering some contributions for knowledge of theology in the last years.
500 years. And when I talk to major theologians, and I do, believe it or not, the answer I always get is, what do you mean by knowledge? And I point out, if I talk to a biologist or a historian or a psychologist, I get concrete answers, but they give you this epistemological, anyway.
But I do think we need to add to that professors of theology often do extremely worthwhile things. Biblical history, biblical literary criticism, archaeology of Palestine. These are all thoroughly reputable and good things. When I said theology is not a subject at all, I meant things like the theology of the transubstantiation of the Trinity, etc. That's not a subject at all. But of course, many people who are professors of theology don't do that sort of nonsense.
It's not nonsense. And actually, it's a very deep, very deep questions. Transubstantiation and the Trinity. And actually, even if those are not true, it's still a subject because it studies the concept, if the concept makes sense. And it studies how does the concept make sense in light of what the Bible says. So that's certainly a subject. You can say, okay, it's not very interesting, but it's a subject. Of course, I believe that, and when you are studying something, that I mean, if Dawkins really wants to argue against the existence of God, he at least needs to know what God is, and he needs to define him, and that's what theology does. Theology gives you some attributes about God. So if there were no theology, then there would be no atheism, because you could not even talk about God. You cannot even, I mean, it would be atheism in the sense that you could not define God, so you would not believe in him for that reason. But you cannot launch arguments against him because he was not defined. And that's what theology does. It defines God for you and it says his attributes. Even if he doesn't exist, that's still a subject, like I pointed. And now theology for human knowledge, like I said, knowledge about the concept of God, philosophical knowledge, logical knowledge. God, if he exists, of course, if God exists, theology is probably the most interesting subject in the world. That's why I love it. And basis for knowledge. Well, like I said in the other video, theology, the existence of theology gives you, based on the existence of God, a nice basis for doing science and for doing philosophy, because you can actually trust. It gives you a nice reason to trust your cognitive faculties and the laws of nature and your rational beliefs based on free will, right? So if you believe that free will is and free will is hard to postulate in a naturalistic world, but in a theistic world, it's not that hard at all to postulate to have free will. And if you believe that you're actually getting conclusions based on free decision and a rational inquiry, it's much it's a much more it is much better. It gives much more strength and confidence to your claims about reality than if you believe that you're simply determined to believe those things, right? And it also gives you confidence that you can understand the universe, because if you believe that a God created the universe and he is an intelligence behind it, then obviously he created with some order. But if you believe that it's just a random thing, then it's not clear at all um, why why it should obey to laws at all, and why it should be order and knowable at all. And moreover, if naturalism is true, then all your thoughts are just electrical signs of the atoms of your brain, an epiphenomenon. So why should you believe that they are reliable at all. And if everything is guided purely by evolutionary processes, then that means that our faculties are aimed at survival, not at truth. So although there is a correlation between those, sometimes it's better for you to believe a falsehood, and people could say, oh, that's why you believe in God. But maybe that's why you believe in other things, like naturalism, because it lets you survive better. Who knows? And when once you get this idea that your cognitive faculties are aimed just at survival and not at truth, then you start doubting them and you start doubting everything. So actually, if you want to see more about this, check Alvin Plantinga's lecture, Naturalism and Science, Where the Conflict Really Lies, or read this book with the same title. Uh, okay, now they are going to talk about dictatorship.
Politics and religion. In a country where we have separation of church and state, why do we think it's okay to allow the policymakers and the politicians to use religious reasoning to guide legislation? So in something like stem cells or gay marriage, where the opponents of it will give a religious reason against it, doesn't that fly in the face of separation of church and state?
Of course it does.
Yeah,
Well, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And I'm going to explain that because that's very important. Although this is absolutely irrelevant to whether God exists or not, but I want to talk about that. Uh, if you give a religious reason for something, that doesn't fly in the face of separation between church and state. Separation between church and state means that the church doesn't have power on the state directly. So you cannot say you don't have, for example, a special seat on the parliament for the pope, or you don't, or things like that. Or but that does not mean that you cannot use religious reasons to justify your views, because that would mean that you are living in an atheistic state where you cannot use religious reasons to support your views. The idea of democracy is that you accept what the majority says. That's the basic idea. If the majority of people believe something because of a religious reason, then it's perfectly legitimate for someone to say that based on this religious reason, I reject this, and all these people back me up, and they are the majority, so we are going to do it. If you want to censor the justify the if you want to censor um, public speech by saying that you cannot justify your views because of religious reasons, then in fact you're attacking democracy and freedom of speech. And it seems to me that they want to do that. Just listen to this.
absolutely. And I think if we have a society where the sad thing that Richard pointed out, we have a society where we tolerate that. It seems acceptable, and people who bring up the problem are viewed as being strident or shrill. And an example which I created a few years ago, a group called Science Debate 2008, and now it's Science Debate 2012. We're trying to create a debate among the presidential candidates on issues of science and technology, which are actually relevant to the governance. But when we tried, in fact, we came very close in 2008, but the candidates decided instead to have a debate on faith, which of course is completely irrelevant to anything that's going to matter because they're all.
It's not.
But I think we need journalists to have the courage to point that out, and then we need.
Yeah, it's not irrelevant. Fate's not relevant because, for example, even in the United States, I'm not American, as you have probably noticed by my accent. I'm Portuguese, but um, in the United States, most of the people are Christians. So of course, faith matters for the religion, for the government. And here, I'm really afraid that this will be the view, because this view that you have to censor religion seems to, they would deny this, and many atheists would be even offended with what I'm going to say, but this view seems to go to like Stalin uh, and um, and Kim Il Sung kind of systems, because you are you're censoring religions more and more and more, and the limit of this is prohibiting it and persecuting it and creating an atheistic dictatorship based on whatever thing, communism or something else. So I'm really worried about this. So what have we seen in this talk? We have seen straw man arguments, like Dawkins saying that, like the one I showed you about religion and about the religious people doing things because they are afraid to be punished, and because and in the same way that the pigeons do the superstitions. We saw also about dichotomy between science and religion, which is false, and then based on that dichotomy they attack religion. That's a straw man. We saw theological ignorance in the way they talk about God. Many times they when they said that God, when they talk about the complexity of God, that they didn't like really understand that it's only complexity of powers, not of structure. When they said that God is like, they portrayed, they said that if God is perfect, then everything He must create is perfect. That's not true. Philosophical ignorance when they talk about nothing, and if all the fallacy of equivocation that they use there, when they said that what is nothing is a scientific question, which is clearly not true, as I showed. It's a linguistic question and a very basic philosophical question. Attacks on freedom and democracy, like I showed here, they want to censor religion, attack on religious beliefs, and get some sort of atheistic state. Although they would deny that, but that's actually what they're defending. Arrogance, like with that man that asked the question and they shut him up. Slandering, when they did talks called liars to the people of the United States, congressmen, former United States presidents, with absolutely no basis for that. Just because, you know, the argument is basically this. I think that if you are educated, you must be an atheist. These people are educated, therefore they must be atheists, even if they say they are not. But they're lying. So that's just blind. Uh, it's some sort of fundamentalism. Uh, Rejection of known data. They reject the statistical data about these things because they think in their worldview it's not possible, so they reject it. This is exactly what they say but religious people do. We think that some younger creationists say, no, there's no way that the world is so old, so we're gonna reject every data, and this is exactly what they did here. And I actually showed why these young earth creationists are not that irrational. Some of them are not that irrational. And false dichotomies. This is a bit of a straw man too, but it's just to emphasize the idea that it's either science or religion. That's absurd. You can have both. That's my main point in this video. There is absolutely no conflict between science and religion. There's some apparent conflict, and there is a very deep uh, cooperation between them. And with science and naturalism, it's the opposite. There is an apparent cooperation, and then there is a deep conflict. Like, just watch Alvin Plantinga's lecture on that. It's very interesting. I just wanna leave with this quote from Louis Pasteur, which is a very famous scientist that you probably know. And he said that science brings man nearer to God. And that's exactly what I believe. God created the world with order. And that's one of the reasons I like science, because I like to study how the God created the world. And I like to understand that. That's fascinating. And the actual fact that the world has order, for me, counts as evidence for God. And the actual fact that science is possible counts as evidence for God. So I encourage all of you to understand that this logic of Krauss and Dawkins is flawed, to investigate better your claims, to question, and I don't ask you to be irrational. I ask you to look at the arguments for God, look at the evidence, and I believe, personally, that you're gonna get to the conclusion that God exists. I will post some arguments on my channel. I have posted some arguments, and I also have some theological discussions if you are interested on that. God bless you.